I am a temple who walks the earth. My womb is fertile for giving birth. I am a woman planted in truth. I grow my branches from sacred roots. You are the form of who you want to be. So come untethered, your soul is free. We're here to heal, we're here to thrive. We are a dream who's come alive. We light a candle, our hearts awake. Illumination for God's sake. A revelation for God's sake. An evolution for God's sake. An inspiration for God's sake. 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 For God's sake.
And so it is. Hello, Essence. This is Wild Soul Medicine Radio, and I'm Jody England. So happy to be with you here on the second week of the brand new year, and looking forward to and not looking forward to our topic today. I always love dropping in with you, and I feel grateful for this opportunity each and every week to really have to come and look into what's going on, what's going on with me, what's happening with the collective, what is there to share, what opportunities are there for, laying down my ego and leaning further into my evolution and inviting all of you to do the same with me. And so this week we are in that vein where I'm going to be looking into, the topic of this show is your competence is killing you. And I hope that that's, an intriguing, idea that's catching your attention, because it really is a brand new one for me, hot off the presses. And so we're going to be talking about that today. And, for some of us, of course, competence is the thing that we hide behind, and it does seem to be running rampant through our sisterhood right now, because there are, especially with the people who gravitate here and who gravitate to my work, there are so many of us that are experiencing this, as we step into our fullness, as we move into these positions of leadership with birthing the new age and offering our gifts in the world in bigger and bigger ways, as we step into shepherding this new paradigm, which is all about the feminine. There's this interesting paradox, right? That as we do that, we are finding ourselves less and less met by the masculine, right? Because it's confusing. It's confusing for all of us, for the men and the women. Like, well, how do you hold me if I'm really powerful? And, how can I be both so successful and also vulnerable? And how do I shift gears from one to the other? And what does all of that look like? So that's what we're delving into today, is the trickiness of what's really underneath this dynamic and where we can play with making some headway in it. And all of this was sparked by actually, and before I move forward, let me just say, for those of you who are like, well, I don't really have the competence thing actually down yet, so maybe this show isn't for me, it's totally for you, right? And I'll be talking about that and illustrating that later. So even if incompetence has been your main gig, your incompetence is killing you, all right? And I'll say more about that as we get rolling. So how this emerged for me is, I mentioned last week on the show that I've really started 2015 in an uncharacteristically kind of a pause. And I actually love beginnings. I'm an Aries. I, tend to be strong out of the gate. I love the beginnings of years. It feels like a fresh new slate for me to plan and prepare and get the show on the road. And yet, so I finished 2014 with 3 months of holding open the portal of magic school, which was magnificent and beautiful and full, and also taxing and distressing and huge. And so, at the beginning of, so I planned to have a couple years off at the end of 2014, which I did. And then when I came into 2015, I was like, okay, great. Here comes the year. Let's get going. And last week really found myself like, I don't want to be back at work. I don't know what my goal is for this year. I don't know what my word is for this year. I don't know. But my intuition really strongly telling me more rest, just be internal, just chill. So I was like, okay, so I, did that. I did that intensely for, the last week. And I just kept kind of sitting with like, what is this? And when will the fire catch? And will I go the whole year without making a plan? And it was really uncomfortable because I started wondering like, what's wrong with me? Am I depressed? I know that my year is about freedom, and how can I do freedom if I don't get some kind of an idea of where will I play and when will I play? And shouldn't I be creating a plan of where I'll be going and who I'll be hanging out with? And so there was just a lot of tension in my system around, really even how to chill out, and fear around doing that. And and so it has not been particularly comfortable, as it never is when we start to lean into the edges that are new for us. And so I've been doing some work with my coach for the last several weeks around the idea of getting my tracker, my tracking mechanism, the tracker part of my personality, of my soul, really to find a way to relax. And I've kind of alluded to this on a couple different shows around, whenever we're really one way, then, what happens is it creates imbalance in our system. So I am an amazing tracker, and I, track planetary movement and, the movements of every individual I've ever come in contact, and all the ones I haven't come in contact with. And, and that's, sort of cool and interesting, and lots of healing can happen from that ability. And the flip side of it is it makes it really impossible to relax. So, I when I sleep, I wake very easily, with any sound across the room. My system is extremely sensitive. And so lots of foods that I put in, don't sit in my system, or, now it's down to even smells and temperature changes and things like that. And it's really caused me to have to retreat a lot into my home and, not even be out in the world that much. And so, all of that's been happening, and I've kind of been dealing with it, in various energetic ways, and like, looking for what's underneath it, and blah, blah, blah. So as I felt into this year, I had a beautiful session yesterday, and it ended up being like the last session with this particular coach for a bit. So we were kind of looking for like, what's the sort of cherry on the top? What are we going to look at here in this last session? And and I even came into the session very uncharacteristically wishy-washy. I'm never wishy-washy. I pretty much know what I want, and I do what I want, and I always have a direction. And I just was like, I don't know what I want. I just feel like I'm not sure. I'm not sure where I'm going, and I feel really uncertain, and I don't even know what to say to have the session about. And my beautiful facilitator said, well, let's stay with that. Let's just be in that. Like, what is that like? And how's that showing up? And what does it feel like? And, so I was relating some of these pieces, like, now that I'm here at the beginning of this year, I've got, plenty of resources. I've got oodles of free time, all the things I've been striving for. This is the life that I said I wanted to create all of these years that I've invested in my own evolution and growing my business and, honing my skill set and all of those pieces. I have them now. And so, so of course there's the mental like, oh yeah, well, I've just reached a threshold and maybe I just need some rest and that's it. But it was like, there's something more. There's something more that's calling me here that I'm not willing to see. And, as I've kind of been walking around my life a little awkwardly, right? So the other night, I'm from Ohio. The Ohio State Buckeyes were in the national championship game, which was awesome. They won. Go Bucks. And so our family had planned, to just kind of hang out together and have a dinner and have fun watching the game. And typically I never do that. I never do that because I always I'll have to get up early the next morning or I still have some work I'm finishing. And so, and also it's not really my gig. I don't necessarily love football, and the kids and my husband like to throw the football during the football game. And it just feels like a lot of it feels like a lot of input for me. And I worry something's going to get broken, blah, blah, blah. I have all my reasons. So I was like, well, I have all this expansion, I don't have to get up early the next morning. I want to be with my family. Isn't this the point, right? I've done all this work so that I can just, chill and do what I want to do on a fun night like this. So, we made the dinner and we settled in for the game and, and it was fun for a little bit, but I could feel my awkwardness. How do I be with my family? Because it's been a while since I've really done it. And it's not like I'm not, it's not like I don't do stuff with them. I do spend time with them, but it's just in a purely non-directional, non-purposeful, I'm not watching a game, one of their sports things, or I'm not taking them to school, or I'm not, there's no purpose to it really. It's just a hangout. That's something that's not in my comfort zone. And so as I was doing it, I was just kind of feeling a little uncomfortable in my body, and I could feel some irritation happening. And so I did it. I managed it for all of the first half of the game. And then I think I made it through third quarter. And then I was like, okay, I have to go to bed now. I'm really tired. And then I didn't go to bed. I just kind of laid back there in my own bed watching the game. So I was using that as a starting point. And we started to look into well, what is that awkwardness? And, because awkwardness is not something that I typically allow myself to experience because I'm competent, right? And this is not the first time that this has come up for me. It was years ago when I went through my energy training. One of the exercises we had to do was we had to stand in front of our classmates and speak our purpose. I'm Jody England and here's what I'm here to do on the planet. And then they would evaluate if we were in essence, right? So it's sort of like the opposite of what would invite your essence to come forward, which made it, all the more challenging to let your essence come forward. And the feedback that I got from my teacher was, you're really tricky because your competence carries you so far, right? And so you did that extremely well, better than most, very charismatic and magnetic, and not fully in essence, right? And I was like, what? You're full of shit. I totally nailed it. And, and of course what he was calling me to was more vulnerability. And so we played with that and practiced it and opened up to it. And left to my own devices, that is not an area that I like to explore. And, and so it's happened here and there. You've heard me vulnerable on the show and things like that. And, and then whenever I can, I take quite a diversion into workaholicism and, busyness and hanging out in my zone of genius. Right? Because, so Gay Hendricks talks about this idea of being in your zone of excellence versus your zone of genius. And this idea that many of us operate in zone of excellence, which is the stuff we're good at, but we don't take the leap fully into genius, which is, what we're really meant to do, which is more of an edge. And I was thinking about that this morning, like, is that where I'm at? Am I really just in my zone of excellence? And it's like, no, I've been operating in my zone of genius. So what is it that could be calling me beyond that? You know? And the answer, of course, is what's calling me is my zone of essence. And in essence, it includes your genius and it's all the rest of you. It's wholeness. It's completeness. So, you know, when I've pondered that in the past, when I've recognized, you know, that I'm uber competent and that I tend to find and attract people around me who are incompetent, right? And so, of course, that's a shadow and, you know, it's projection. So I'm projecting on them the thing that I'm afraid to look at in me. And where I always had gotten stuck before is feeling like if I want to heal that, I have to become incompetent, right? This is what the ego does to us. It says like, oh, but if you go there, you're going to have to be that thing that you dislike, you know? And so, you know, and I've tried it many different ways because my husband is my primary target of, you know, where I pin my incompetence and where I see it. And so, you know, I've tried lots of different ways of like being more patient with him and being more loving and, you know, everything but actually looking at, I've even looked at my own incompetence. Like, oh yeah, I'm actually afraid of doing this thing or that thing. So I have been down that road, sisters, right? Like I have done the work around this. And so as I showed up in my session with my coach yesterday, you know, we stayed in the awkwardness, which was the feeling of the thing that I typically avoid. Because normally, even when I see like that I need to heal this incompetence, I want to fix it, right? So I want to competently handle my incompetence. Do you see? I'm tricky like that. And you probably are too, right? The more evolved we get, we develop all these special little bypasses where we're like, oh, I want to handle my, my big, open, loving heart. And so I'm going to give that a lot of love, right? I'm going to love my loving heart. Instead of like, oh, well, what's really the shadow of your loving heart? Is that actually I'm pissy, right? And I have opinions and I don't like it. If you tend to be someone who shows up more on the incompetent side, like you can't ever get it together, or you can't, connect the dots or make something happen, you may be showing up in your victim, right? And so victim is your home note. And for you, the edge is like, how could I step out of that so you become a victim to your victim, right? Like, well, how can I step out of my victim? Because like people might be mean and there are mean people. And so I better just keep, tucking my tail between my legs rather than standing in my power because I wouldn't even know how I would do that. Right. This is how our psyches are put together. This is how shadow works. This is how our ego works. So there's no shame in it. It's really, this is why I'm sharing today because it's so fascinating to me, the portal for clearing that this presents when you get the proper facilitation and when you start to become aware that this is a thing and that that it's the opposite of what you think. So it's not that you're going to walk through the portal of incompetence. So if you're me, right? You're not going to walk through this portal of awkwardness and then, become a sniveling weakling, right? Which would be my worst nightmare. I'm going to walk through that and I'm going to become more whole. That's what's on the other side. So let me just tell you what that walking through the portal looked like for me. And we sat in the awkwardness. We sat in the feeling of like, I don't know what to do and I'm not sure I fit here. And, that feels emotional even it still feels emotional as I say that. Like I don't like that feeling, and of course we don't like it. That's why we've discarded it. And so we sat in that and then, it was hard for me to stay there. So I kept going unconscious and then I was like hovering above it and then I kept wanting to fix it. Like, okay, I felt it for a minute. And so what needs to happen? What needs to happen to make that better? And we kept leaning in and, and then it got kind of heavier and then we opened the door to let's just be with weakness. Let's be with weakness. Like, tell your story about it. Why do you hate it? Why do you hate it? Why don't you want to be with it? And what's wrong with it? And so I just started talking like, it feels pointless. It feels worthless. It feels like a waste of space. It feels like we're not going to save the planet. Here's the weakness that I see in the world and all of the evil that it leads to. And so I just kind of like opened the floodgates, and then we moved into, kind of some more intensity then, like, when I see weakness, I want to kick it. I just want to kick it because I hate it so much. And of course, that's what I do, right? That's what I do in my life to weak people. Not my clients typically. Really not my clients ever, right? Because that's my zone of genius, but more like people in my life, like my husband and, contractors and, things like that. And, I'm sharing all of this because I want to invite you to look at your shadow. All of those places that you're ashamed to admit, this is what you really think. This is what really is operating in the undercurrent of your thought process, of your energetic system. This is why you're creating what you're creating, right? And so it's like when that's operating underneath my system, it serves as fuel for me for my competence, right? Like I hate weakness and I never want to be that. And so, I get to be uber competent, and I get to have a, $400,000 launch, and I get to have, people from around the world flocking to my, programs and thinking I'm amazing and Supergirl in case you have not seen. So yeah, so it's fuel for that. And there is a payoff. And at some point there's going to be paying the piper, right? Because you can't have everything be fully one way. It's all yin and yang. It's all balance. It's all a dance. And so there's going to have to be a blowout in some area of your life. And, for me, the burnout's been happening all along. I've just been able to overcompensate for it, and the burnout has looked like tension in my relationship, because I've had a hard time being vulnerable and soft and feminine with my husband. And it's been burnout in my body, right? And so, one of the beautiful things that my coach said to me is, she said, when you disown a part of yourself so intensely, some other area of your life has to pick it up. And so you end up marrying someone who carries the weakness for you, or you end up carrying it in your body. And that's largely how I've related to my body is weakness. My body is weak, right? It's the thing I don't want to look at because I can't get it on board with the memo, right? That we're competent and we're good and we're doing this thing. And so, it frustrates the heck out of me because it needs so much tending and attention and, it's like it's coughing and it needs stuff. And I hate all of that about my body, right? And so as we leaned into the awkwardness and the wanting to kick weakness and really hating it, she was really just holding space for me to be with, the ick of my story about it. And what came forward from there was where that came from, which was, of course, from my childhood. And all of our shadow develops in our childhood, right? It's part of the egoic response to survival. As the psyche develops, and then we think like, we can't be this way in order to live. So put that in the closet and put that away. And so, as I share this about my family of origin, I just want to say, like, my family of origin they're beautiful, they're loving, they're, kind people in general. And, and I had a pretty normal childhood growing up. And, I have plenty of story about it. And in my childhood, I got to go back and be with my little shiny girl, my little pure, innocent one that isn't jaded, and she hasn't been there and done that and seen it all, which is kind of how I relate to the world, that nothing scares me and nothing can faze me, and, I've got it all handled. And she was like the antithesis of that. And so, I got to play with her and see her. And at first it was a little like, she even showed up dressed like a candy heart, like in the kind of like silvery, shiny pink and red, which are everything about that I eschew, I'm like grounded, earthy, power panther, and she's this like candy, sugary heart in cheesy colors, so again, like this is the shadow. This is the parts we don't look at. And so she came out and I started to like look at her and just notice what pure light she is. She was just like this beautiful, sweet little yumminess. And I started tuning into how that light was unsafe, in where I grew up. That it was, very much a redneck farming community, family, blue collar. Like there wasn't room for that kind of shininess and that kind of seeing. And there was like, there was death and there was anger and there was, violence, not within the family, but like we were farmers. So there was always some animal dying, or we would, we would raise our little calves, Ellie and Daisy, and then we'd be eating them, eating hamburgers. And I would say, like, why are we eating Ellie and Daisy? And they, there'd be some like, well, that's what we do. And that's the way of things. And just like, it was this really visceral processing of how that landed in my system. And I have to just say, like, consciously, I thought I had handled all of that. I thought I was like, okay with that. Like, that is the way of things. And, that just is how it is to live on a farm. And I'm glad I learned those lessons. And yet as I really dropped into it, I could process the scarring of that. And I hate to even say scarring. It was more like how it was in my system. I'm actually from a family of warriors. Every one of them is either a primary or a secondary warrior. So there's 5 of us, right? And so you can imagine this like sensitive star child in the den of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and, work really hard and don't take any shit. And it was like, hateful and judgmental and all of that. And just noticing how I adapted to that as a survival mechanism, And I just can't say this enough. I want to say that without judgment of my family, right? Like they're all that way for all of the reasons that, their evolutionary path has brought them. And I don't say that it's wrong or right. There's certainly gifts in all of that. Like I am grateful for the strength and the competence in it. I certainly became who I am because of being steeped in that. And we have to reclaim all of our parts. And, in our society, there is there's a lot of lip service given to certain qualities. Like you should be competent and you should be successful. And, and there isn't any lip service paid to the value of, things like weakness and vulnerability and uncertainty and, airiness and ungroundedness and, all of those pieces. Like there's nothing bad about any of them. And what becomes bad, if there is a bad, or what becomes unworkable is when we allow ourselves to become so fully one way that we lose the balance because we're not made that way. So you can't ever get rid of it. And then you end up just dragging it along behind you, this shadow that you pretend doesn't exist. But it's really, it's a vital part of you. So as we started to lean into it, there's still like my ego has all of this evidence built against like, don't be that weak one again. And, don't say the sensitive thing because you're just going to get made fun of or you're going to get hurt or, don't shine that light because somebody will definitely try to snuff that out. So my coping mechanism growing up was to not be soft and shiny, but to be uber competent. So they still didn't really get me as uber competent either because it was so out of the ballpark of where they were operating, but it was safer, right? At least it was a stronger version of a place to put my light. So as I felt into her, every part of me was like, I don't want to go here. I don't want to be weak. I don't want to, she's so fragile. Like, where will she go in this world? Because the world felt so mean. And, and this has been surfacing for me even throughout the launch. I've talked about this on the show too, like this feeling everyone's disapproval everywhere. What makes that happen is like when she's underground, right? So we have this pain. We say like, we can't survive with this particular characteristic of ourselves, right? And so we split her off and we lock her away in a closet. We think we're doing it for our safety, right? Her safety and my safety. She has to separate off. But from the closet down there, she's saying like, what about me? And so she surfaces wherever she can. And she surfaces in that, she still is feeling the disapproval of everyone everywhere, even when I've never met them, and she's sending up the SOS. And it's why you can't really get rid of those things. When you have this, when you have something come through that doesn't feel good, but you can't quite get to it, it's probably one of your shadows talking to you, and we know this, right? And many people who listen to this show are shadow walkers because, that's who I am and that's who gravitates here. And I feel like this show is a call for those of us who work in shadow to actually go look into the shadow of this, the shadow that on the other side of your competence and your bravery is something that's calling your attention. And so what was calling to me is as I leaned in with her, I started to really just be enamored by her purity, by her curiosity about the world, by the complete lack of jadedness in her, that like every moment was a curiosity and everything she looked at became a portal into something else. Like she could look at the blue sky and just see it completely for what it is and also use it as a magical portal into another place, and I was just learning from her and I ended up sitting at the feet of her, just sitting at her feet and letting her teach me her ways. And I was sobbing and sobbing. Like there was so much grief about having lost her and left her, and grief about not knowing her, and also joy about feeling like how much easier and more fun life could be if she had a seat at the table. If everything didn't have to be about darkness and shadow, and if there was light infusing it, and if there was lightness, as part of the equation. And so it was very profound, and there's nothing better than going to school, getting schooled in the thing that you teach, right? It's a pretty awesome experience. And, and so we played with it and I ended up integrating her and, playing with this inner parent, right? So, my coach, which is Sway Spilkin, you've heard her on here many times. She teaches, brilliant course for healers on courting your medicine. And it's along these lines, but like preparing yourself for being this healer and having these pieces firmly in place. And so she was teaching me about when you have, so you have your inner medicine woman, right? She's the one who's wise. She knows how to heal people. She knows, the work that I do. And then where does this little girl have a seat in that? Does she, so if you're, running a magic school class, is she part of that? How does she function there? What does she infuse? And then also adding an inner parent, like an inner healthy parent who can nurture her and care for her, right? So that inner parent faces inward. And so what it looked like to me is as I'm facilitating a magic school class, for example, my inner little girl, she's like this light right in the center. She's like Tinkerbell's light, she's this life force of purity right in the center of things. And then, medicine woman is kind of up top and out front, and she's, guiding the wisdom. And then my inner parent is sort of out in front. So what she does is she protects my little girl so that she's not purely vulnerable. It's like, it's not her against the world. But, if somebody in my class gets projection-y or, if something unkind floats my way, my inner parent feels that and says like, oh no, she's good. And then if my little girl gets scared or something happens, the inner parent works with her and says, oh, that was so scary. I know that part didn't feel good. What do you need? How can I help you? What needs to happen here? And so it's this beginning conversation, right? It's a beginning conversation of how do I really allow her to be fully in? How do I protect her? How do I make sure that I don't push her to the back again when it feels scary? Or when I move into warrior mode, how do I not just push her to the side, which is what I have done all these years. So I am very much in the inquiry of this. I am so playing with the rawness of it all. And I'm very hopeful about it. Like I can see it's not even potential. I can see the wholeness that she brings, and it's almost like I can't imagine or believe how well I've done without her. You know what I mean? Like she's so vital to who I really am. In a lot of ways, she's an essential, not even a lot of ways, she is essential to who I am, right? I'm not going to even minimize it. It's almost like she's in some ways the most essential part of who and what I am. And I think that's probably the way of our deepest shadows, right? Is, it becomes sort of trite to say like, oh, our shadow is our medicine and our shadow is our gift. And like, we get that on a brain level, on the mind level. And then there's this energetic experience of it, of if we don't go looking at these places that we're so afraid of, that we're so cut off from, we end up missing the whole point, or missing the whole point. And it takes a lot of freaking courage to go do this, because everything in you will say, run the other way. It'll say, don't show up for the appointment and don't look in that closet. And okay, we looked for a second and that was probably good. And let's move forward. And so, my work right now is really to start playing with embodying this. And I got this beautiful assignment, which I'm so excited about. I told Sway, I'm like, I both love this and hate this at the same time. So my assignment is to actually go do a ceremony where I go out on the earth, and for at least 3 hours, or it could be all day, I experience the world as weakness. And so I walk as weakness, and I talk as her, and I experience the world in the way that she would. And, the point is to start creating space inside of me for that whole new level of harmonic. Right? And so if you do this from a brain perspective, your brain will say, well, why would we need that? Like, why do we need to add weakness? We're doing good. We're doing really good, and we've got all this success, and, what's the point? And the point is, because what we're going to find, what I already have started to find, is that, weakness is a story, and there's so much gift in it, right? So what I discovered with her is that what I thought was weakness in her, there is weakness, right? Because it's both and. So she is weak, and she can't actually function in the world without the medicine woman and the inner parent running interference for her, right? Because she's just too pure. But she certainly has gifts within there. And so it's like she can't be that pure if she's not also that weak. And it's about learning that relationship of how do those things play together? And where does she get to come out? And, I can feel already in my relationship so much potential for opening around this. And, and Sway and I were talking about that because I've been, working for a couple years on not always wearing the pants in my family and not, being the knower of all things and running the show. And like, how can I open into my femininity, and how can I be met by my husband, And we certainly, after 17 years of marriage, have created this dance that has looked like me showing up in competence and in my opinion, him showing up in incompetence, right? That's the story that I run. And, so we've been dancing at moving that and moving that and moving that. And he's been working with Sway too, which is, so beautiful. And so she was saying like, well, you may be surprised as you start to pick up more of this piece for yourself, you won't need him to carry it so much or at all, right? And I wonder what might shift. And my ego did like the sound of that, right? Like, well, what's the point of picking up the weakness? So it's a lot more fun to put it on him and then make myself right, And so I like the sound of like, oh, I could get what I want if I, pick this up. And so it was just a hilarious demonstration of this because I hadn't even told him about my session yesterday. And I was sitting in my bed this morning typing the email about the show, which is about this topic, right? So I'm typing about what I'm learning about competence killing me and whatever. And there was a piece of candy that ended up on the floor of my room, and it had gotten on these ants on it. And so we had sprayed the ants last night and they were dead, but the pile of, like, it was a huge pile of ants was laying beside my bed. So I'm typing my email and my husband comes in with the vacuum. And I said, I can get that. And he said, no, I've got it. I'm fully competent to do this. And I just died laughing, right? I died laughing because here's my husband like clamoring to serve me in a way that I would typically never let him, and literally saying the words that he's competent as I'm writing about, me picking up this piece so he doesn't have to carry it. Like, what? So literally these things happen. These things happen when you start shifting. And I told him I was going to talk about that on the radio because it was so hilarious. And then, the not so glamorous thing was, so, we were on the same page this morning. And then just before the show, we got in a kind of a heated argument, right? So this is the path of owning the shadow. It's not pretty. It doesn't tie up in a bow. It's not like I did this thing and now I'm fixed, right? It's like you're creating a brand new groove for yourself. And so it takes every single time that it shows up, having the courage again to step in and say, okay, I am committed to owning all these parts of myself. What would weakness do here? What would my little girl do here if I invited her to the table? How could this look? Because as a warrior, my mode is always like, oh, I get scared or I didn't get what I wanted. Rah, right? Whose fault is it? Who needs to be accountable for this? Who's not taking responsibility, right? Because that's the way that I've lived my life and been and been so, quote, successful. So it's like learning a new language to entertain softness, to sit in the awkwardness of, I don't know how to be with this, and even expanding that whole idea in myself of just being with without fixing, without looking at, I'm uncomfortable or I see you're uncomfortable. So how do we change that? But expanding into just curiosity, really just curiosity, which is the opposite of judgment. So judgment is like, I've been there, I've done that, I know it. And this is tricky because this is what I do. My second best way of reading energy is knowing, right? So feeling is first for me, empathic. Second is knowing. So it's how I navigate the world is by download and by like being certain about things. And so, this is the way of our gifts as well, is it doesn't mean that that's not my gift. It means that there is more to my gift when I start embracing the things that I think are not part of it. It's completely counterintuitive, but that's where the richness of the medicine is by heading in the direction of the thing that you think is going to take you out of the game. You know, it doesn't make any sense. No business coach will tell you when you have a launch like the one that I've just had that you should take some time off and go inward, right? That you should have zero plan for the year of what you'll launch next and worry not at all about building momentum, you know? But this is the feminine way. The feminine way says, you know, it's all about essence. Like I have an intuitive sense that as I embrace this, it's going to completely up-level my game and it's going to completely shift how and what I'm offering in the world. But that's not why I'm doing it. You know, I could go in and have it, you know, show me that actually I don't need to ever do another launch again. But if I'm whole, I don't actually care. You know, that's the thing. And so I can feel some of you saying like, well, what was the argument about with Lance just before the call? So I'll say, you know, it's a little bit of like a vulnerability backlash, or a vulnerability hangover, as Brene Brown talks about it. So I was really vulnerable and very tender through the afternoon and the night yesterday. And, I even had dreams all night last night about snakes because I'm a healer. I dream about snakes all the time. And last night there was this box of snakes and they were all these different colors, which I've been having lots of awarenesses around color, which I typically didn't see. I typically used to only just see in black and white, which is such a metaphor for my soul path, you know, that the world is black and white and it's all personal responsibility and all of that. And I've been having all these healings with light spectrum and with rainbow colors. And I told you about her colors yesterday. So in the dream, there's this box of snakes and they're all these bright, vivid rainbow colors. And I was holding this really beautiful purple one, but it kept wanting to bite me. And I was trying to squeeze it really tight so it wouldn't bite me. But then I was like kind of hurting it. And then the tighter I squeezed it, the more it would want to bite me. And I knew I just needed to stop squeezing it, but I couldn't quite figure out how to do that. And in the meantime, while that was all happening, nobody was watching the snakes and they all went away. Right. And so it was just beautiful because it was my psyche trying to process like what happens when no one's tracking, you know, like where do all the snakes go and like where do the healers go if I'm not watching them? Am I going to get bitten if I just pay attention to myself? It's so good. Right. So anyway, so I was in this beautiful like open space. And then what happened with my husband and I is we're in the process of doing some big remodeling to the home that we bought last year. And we're just beginning. So we're in the process of like finding contractors and deciding and prioritizing what makes sense and, you know, how much does stuff cost and what are we doing first and things like that. And so he's largely been in charge of that. And so this morning we went to go look at a contractor, a showroom with some stuff that relates to the remodel. And nearly every one of the contractors we've talked to so far has been not a match, not a match for us energetically. They're very lack-minded. They're just like not on our page, like they kind of come at life from a space of negativity and things are hard and, why do you want to pay so much and stuff like that. And so we came home from that, and then my husband made another call to another contractor and found out this other thing we want is like $70,000. And so I started from a place of vulnerability. Like, it doesn't really feel good to me. We're having all of these contractors that are, they cost a lot, and we keep getting no's. And, I'd like to shift the energetic of that. Now, as I'm replaying it, I'm really processing this in the moment because I hadn't processed it. It literally happened 5 minutes before I got on the show. What I could have done was just sat in the uncomfortableness of, wow, it felt like I had a lot of money, but then there's all this stuff that needs done. And, it feels a little hopeless. Like, are we going to be able to do all the things we want? Or am I going to have to keep working? Right. That's probably really what I was attracting is like, am I going to have to keep working so we can get what we want? Right. So your ego is going to keep trying to, put something back in place or put some more evidence in, like, don't do that weakness thing. Like, you wanted to do that and that was a funny little thing you tried on, but here's all the evidence why we can't do that. And then it sort of devolved into our old pattern, right? So he kind of got defensive and then I got attacking, and then, and then it was just like a trading back and forth of like who's more wrong and whose fault is it and who can shift the energy of it. And it was decidedly not vulnerable, right? And the topic of it was competence, right? Like I know that I could call some contractors and get them to show up and do what I'm wanting them to do, and you're not doing that. And and so here's the tricky thing is who's right? Right? And the thing is no one's right. So there's medicine in that for him. There's medicine in it for me. And it's like, it's the inquiry of it. It's the curiosity about what is this that will lead to an evolution around it. So when we mindlessly keep going down the same paths without asking, what is this about? We're just asleep. And so we're just going through emotion. And then when we get that level handled, like we start asking, what is this about? The next level that may be calling to you is how can you open up this vent at the other side of who you think you are, of the other side of your genius? How can you begin to explore where you are disowning a part of you? And so that can be things like, it could be anything. If you have a lot of degrees, if you've taken a lot of classes and you have lots of certifications, what you need to probably look at is what's in the shadow of not knowing. What's it like for you to feel stupid? Right? If you have a lot of money, and that's kind of been your primary focus, what's it like on the other side of that? Like, what's your story about people who don't have money? Is it about power? Is it about prestige? Is it, what if you were a low man on the totem pole and nobody thought you were awesome? Again, if you're like super loving, what's the other side of that? Like, how do you vent being, uber loving and caring and accepting of people? What's the other side of that? Maybe it's mean. Maybe it's mean, like looking at a mean part of yourself. Right? So because we would think like, well, why would anybody want to bring mean in? But it's not about bringing the mean. It's about allowing the mean some space so that you can understand the gifts that it also brings. Right? Because packed in with that dynamic of mean is being able to stand up for yourself and having a backbone and being able to set boundaries and having your own opinion, and you can't have one without the other. So you can't just shave off all your edges and say, I'm a nice person and that's my version of success and I don't need to do anything else, because there is a backlash, right? When you're just totally nice, people can't feel you and then you become the victim, right? And you can't be fully intimate in your relationship because you're not fully there. So if you're kidding yourself in this moment, like, no, I think I've got all my shadow handled, I've really done it. I challenge you because none of us ever have it all handled. And trust me, I do this for a living. I look at my shadow for a living. And I'm just now discovering this piece that feels so rich that I would definitely not have been able to explore without having created this level of security in my system now, right? Where I've got the money and I've got the time, so I can no longer use those as excuses. And with that part handled, my warrior can take enough of a break to say, okay, well, what might be here? What else might be here? And I tell you, one of the other things that has opened for me, it has been opening, is this, so in the past, it's been really hard for me to hire support, right? To like hire, staff. And then also even like if I hire a coach or if I hire someone to do work at my house, I tend to create situations where I know more than the people I'm hiring and I do better than them and I know better than them. And then I'm teaching them about their work, even though I've never done their work. And, and I say that actually with a lot of, there's truth in it too. Like really, like that really happens, and also it's not that fun, like it was fun for a while. My ego loved it. And, what I've been recently getting present to is like, wouldn't it be cool if I could show up and be surprised and delighted? If I could be surprised and delighted by, somebody designing a new bathroom for me that I couldn't even have imagined would be so cool. Or if, the edge for me is like with my husband, like, what if, he has been doing this, like, he hasn't cooked for me like ever. And I've been wanting him to. And then in the past week, he's probably cooked me like 15 amazing, healthy meals on his own. So it's like, as I start to soften into this place of me that allows curiosity and delight and wonderment, then I become available for all sorts of things that my jaded, closed heart, my warrior heart, is not available to, right? And, and there may not be all good things with it. Like as I open, I may end up experiencing more pain than I would have if my heart wasn't open. Or, I may feel more pain about the state of the world. I don't actually know the answer to that question. But what I know is I'm no longer willing to exist as only half of myself, even if the world thinks that's good, or even if that's what's been easy, or, has got me where I am. For me, the prime directive is about wholeness and about essence, and there is nothing more important than that. So in whatever way you are called to begin exploring this for yourself, my invitation for you is to include this exploration as part of your intention for yourself for 2015, is to begin to explore these hidden parts of yourself. That really is our untaming. And, so again, whether competence is the thing that's killing you, or whether it's incompetence, or whether it's organization or disorganization, or knowledge or lack of knowledge, like whatever your story is, whatever your strong suit is, what if you allowed this year to be about you beginning to explore those hidden parts of yourselves in pursuit of more wholeness? And, there's so many ways that you may go about that. It may, you may have some meditations where you talk to your inner little girl. You may invest in some coaching for yourself so that you can have facilitation to look at these places. You may consider a walkabout, like the ceremony that I'm going to be doing. I have to wait till it gets above single digits here, which hopefully will be soon. But I really couldn't be more excited to, go out on the land and walk as weakness and see, what does that tell me, and what can I learn about that, and how can I create the possibility of that living inside my system in a way that feels full and like home. I'm going to journal about it. I'm going to draw. I'm going to do things that that little girl would do. She loved art, and she loved silly things, and she, loved to have tea parties and and she loved to play, all things that are not part of my regular repertoire at this point. So there's really an infinite number of ways that you can begin to explore these things, even without money, just on your own. But it is time. It is time. And, this is how, to just circle back around, this is how we get met, This is what's running rampant through the sisterhood, is like, oh, the rise of the feminine. I can't be met. Nobody can be with me. Like, where are all the men? And I think the better question for us to be asking is, how can we show up in our fullness, right? So if we're not being met, it's like, where are we not meeting ourselves? What part of you is calling for you to come and reintroduce yourself? That is the meeting that is tugging at your soul. And so, my sisters, that brings us to a close for today. I am looking forward to hearing what this brings up in you. If you are not yet part of the tribe, you can join us there at facebook.com/groups/Wild Soul Medicine Radio Tribe. We are starting to have some juicy conversations over there, and would love to hear from you about what scary part of your shadow are you interested in delving into. And it might even be cool. I have this sense that, there are pairs, right? So there may be, as I begin to talk about exploring weakness, there may be people who are needing to explore strength. And so we might have opportunities to share with each other, like what's good about strength and how does it feel in your system and what exercises might you do to begin to entertain that, right? And for me, like I'd love to hear from those of you who do weakness very well, who do incompetence, or who do being the omega dog, right? Like I want to hear how do you do that really? What does it feel like? And what are the joys of it? And why do you do it? And what are the payoffs? So yeah, it's an edgy conversation, and we're just taking the shame out of the closet. We all have it. You can't hide from it. We know you have a shadow, whether you're seeing it or not. So come share it with us over in the tribe. And next week, we are having some fantastical, amazing guests. We are having Ariel White and Amber Hartnell, who are coming to talk to us about pleasure and using pleasure as a portal to bring our essence through into the world. So you will definitely want to be on that very juicy conversation. And so, my sisters, until then, I love you. I love your shadow. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.
We light a candle, our hearts awake. Illumination, for God's sake. A revelation, for God's sake. An inspiration, for God's sake. Illumination, for God's sake. For God's sake. For God's sake. For God's sake.